there was some publicity around it.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of bundling me into the back of the Black Maria, as they usually do, they invited me to sit in the front, next to the driver.
This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 152 for the 16th of February 2023. Bertie Ahern, we're told, has been readmitted to Fianna Fáil. It might be better to use the term rehabilitated. Fianna Fáil activists gave him a standing ovation at an event recently. It was to mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, obviously chosen to focus attention on the one positive part of his time as Taoiseach. It's worth remembering that he resigned from Fianna Fáil more than 10 years ago ahead of a motion to expel him for lying to the Moriarty Tribunal. It's the little things that trip you up, as his predecessor said. He had already brazened out the ludicrous lie that when he was finance minister, he didn't have a single bank account himself. The fact that he was going through a messy separation from his wife at the time, who would have been entitled to look at any accounts to determine the appropriate support and child support payments, that's not irrelevant. That's also a good explanation as to why he owned his house under a false name. When he was shown to have wads of cash in a safe that could not be explained by any other legitimate means, his only explanation for where the money came from was that he won it on the horses. Seriously, he said that with a straight face. Nobody believed him, of course. It was all obvious lies. But when the Moriarty report said unambiguously that he was a liar, it was impossible to even pretend to believe him. He was an embarrassment to the party that had to pretend to be horrified by all this, hence the move to expel him, and him jumping before he was pushed. Anyone who has any doubts about why Ahern is now being pushed to the fore like this, rejoining Fianna Fáil, big events with party loyalists to celebrate him, even DCU giving him an honorary doctorate to the disgust of many of its students and graduates, of course without the slightest pressure from anyone. If you have any doubts about why this is happening, then you haven't been paying attention, and you should note that the Orus will become vacant in about 2 years' time at most. I don't like Ahern trying to cheat his ex-wife, I don't like his dodgy financial dealings, and I am at best amused that the dying embers of Fianna Fáil, which, let's remember, Ahern destroyed as an electoral force, I'm at best amused that the dying embers of Fianna Fáil are willing to dredge up memories of their previous incompetence and corruption to go along with their current incompetence and corruption. But don't let me stop them from doing whatever self-harm they feel like. I don't like any of that, but that's not the best reason to think that Ahern should be grateful to spend his retirement in well-paid anonymity and not bother us with all of this nonsense. That type of corruption, the things that everyone mentioned are bad, don't get me wrong, but they aren't the real problem. Even at the top end, if Ahern stole 10 or 20 million like Haughey, there's 5 million people in the country. That's less than a fiver each at most. And he tried to cheat his ex-wife. That's bad, that's wrong, but again, there are 5 million of us. That was only cheating one person. Not good, but not the worst of it, not by a mile. What was the worst? Let me tell you. Remember the smoking ban? Remember how much we talked about the smoking ban? Saying that, it strikes me, quite a few of you listening might actually not remember the smoking ban. Smoking in workplaces, including bars, trucks, taxis and building sites, was banned on the 29th of March 2004. Next year is the 20th anniversary. If you don't remember the time, let me tell you, almost nothing else was discussed for months before and after. People gave opinions that it would be impossible to enforce, it would never work. Some people thought it was great, Some people said that it was the end of democracy. They actually said that not being able to smoke in a pub meant the end of democracy. Others said it would be the end of the tourist trade, or said that it would be bad for people's health. Yes, they really said that too. But the main discussion was whether it would work, whether it would be possible to enforce at all, with a large section of opinion saying that it would not. I asked that question to someone I knew at the time who was working on the project in the lead up to the ban. This person, I should say, smoked maybe 30 cigarettes a day. And they made a prediction. They said that in 2 years' time, we'd be so used to the smoking ban that nobody would ever be able to believe that it had ever been any other way. And basically, they turned out to be right. One pub owner, the day after the ban came into force, announced publicly that he had not enforced it in his pub, and he would continue to defy it and allow his customers to do the same. The naysayers were convinced that this was the end of the experiment. The level of mass defiance would surely grow beyond what any authorities could tackle. What could they do? Impose a few grand of a fine, wait for your man not to pay it. By the time they could imprison him for like a week, the whole thing would have long since collapsed. But no, a well-thought-out plan swung into action. The next morning, the Department of Health went into the High Court and said that this guy had broken the law the night before and had announced his intention to break it again that night, and they asked for an injunction to stop this. It was duly granted. That's what happens when you announce your intention to break the law on national television. So this clown was suddenly faced with the proposition that if he allowed smoking when his bar reopened that evening, he would be in prison before closing time and likely to stay there until he gave an undertaking to a judge not to break the law. He folded immediately, and no doubt anyone thinking of imitating him had swift second thoughts. It was, of course, the current Fianna Fáil leader, Micheál Martin, who was the health minister behind this, and he had a strong personal commitment to the policy. And it worked. Credit to him. But I mention this to illustrate that when commitment exists, when political commitment exists, when the government decides that it wants to implement a policy, when they really want to make it work, they can. With the right planning, the right design, and the right level of commitment from those in authority, the government can execute the policies that it wants to. The corollary is also true. When a government fails at something, it's rarely because they really tried to do it but just couldn't manage it. When they fail, it's almost always for one of two reasons. Either they didn't care enough to really try, or they didn't really want it to succeed at all. It's true that some ex-ministers say once in a while when they come out of office that they really tried to do something and didn't manage it. That can happen. But in truth, that only happens when other ministers are either not cooperative or downright hostile. If the government as a whole is behind a policy, unless it's physically impossible, they can do it. They're the government. The Office of Corporate Enforcement, the ODCE, was set up in 2001 while Ahern was Taoiseach in reaction to the corruption that was exposed by various tribunals. Or, I should say, in an effort to answer the criticism that flowed from that corruption. Supposedly this would prevent corruption going forward. Fintan O'Toole has well documented the way that the ODCE was starved of power, starved of staff, and starved of finances. Basically a brass plate with nothing behind it. Even now, the ODCE has only 30 staff. Compare that to the amount of law enforcement resources spent tackling marijuana grow houses. The ODCE has totally failed to deal with corruption, bad governance, and outright theft. It is an abysmal failure if you consider that its job is to tackle corporate fraud. But if you consider that its job is to be a shiny button that you can take out and polish up a little every time that another scandal leaks without ever actually troubling the white-collar criminals too much, then it works quite well. And the cost of that is not a $5 or a $10 each, or the odd person swindled. That has cost Ireland billions. Billions and billions, most of which we will never know the details of. There are plenty of other reasons, but that alone is a good enough reason why, if Ahern has his eyes on a large state-funded building on the north side of Dublin in which to while away his declining years, I would suggest one about 3 kilometres to the east of the one he's thinking of. Bertie Ahern does not belong in Áras an Uachtaráin. He belongs in Mountjoy Jail. In a moment, we'll have that interview, but first I just want to say thanks to all of the patrons on Patreon. I really appreciate everyone who donates on Patreon. We don't get a huge amount of money out of it, but it covers the bills for things like hosting the podcast. Kevin and myself basically donate our time for free. And it's a great morale booster when we get a new patron. It lets us know that there are people out there listening and appreciating the podcast. We make a big effort to cover things that are undercovered in Irish media. So you're more than welcome to listen for free. But if you think you could afford to do the same as the other donors and throw in a couple of euro once or twice a month, there's details how to do that on the website and at the end of the show.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast.
Davith, tell me what it was like being sent to prison.
I had been expecting a call from the police because I knew I was due to be imprisoned, and there was quite a lot of publicity around it. Mm-hmm. So when the Black Maria arrived at my flat in Penarth outside Cardiff one morning, I was sort of half expecting their arrival, and I think the police were very aware of the fact that there was some publicity around it. Mm-hmm. So instead of bundling me into the back of the Black Maria, as they usually do, they invited me to sit in the front, mm-hmm. Next to the driver. So my journey to Cardiff Prison was quite a pleasant one, sitting in the front of a Black Maria, and I was due to be there for quite a few weeks. And that was the first time. I went to prison a few times after that, but mm-hmm. It was a strange experience. I learned a lot, and in any place like that, you do learn, and you do get to close contact with interesting people mm-hmm. from various backgrounds, and I will never forget the experience.
I should say I'm talking to Davith Owen. He is a Welsh person, obviously. Davith, tell people of Ireland who may not be familiar with the story why you were sent to prison.
Well, during the 60s, we had some quite vigorous language campaigns mm-hmm. in Wales for the Welsh language, because until 1967, the Welsh language did not have any official status in Wales at all, although there were sort of 500,000 of us speaking it as our everyday lingua franca. Mm-hmm. And so there were, from 1962 onwards, there were quite radical campaigns for official status for the Welsh language. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those campaigns involved breaking the law, like blocking a road or taking over a building, or even in a restricted way, some destruction of property. And of course, in the end, I was imprisoned for non-payment of fines in the road signs campaign. That was quite a widely acclaimed campaign, because we, after failing by using other constitutional means, we painted over all English signs in Wales and that, of course, had a lot of publicity, and in the end, led to a very strong bilingual policy for road signs all over Wales. But this whole process took many years, and I was one of the many imprisoned for non-payment of fines, or sometimes some people were imprisoned directly for destruction of road signs and so on.
And when you say destruction of road signs, obviously, as I understand it, about 20% of the people of Wales, about 2 million people in Wales, and about 20% of them use Welsh as their main language. At that time, as you say, in the 1960s, in a Welsh-speaking area, would all of the road signs have been in English only?
Oh yeah. There was no permission for bilingual road signs. There were a few sort of private or independent signs in Welsh, but all the official public road signs were in English only. And of course, similar to Ireland, many of the original names had been anglicized over the years. So part of the campaign was to go to use the proper spelling of the Welsh names, but also to have things like school up in Welsh as well. And as I say, it took many years. It was a very vigorous campaign. And then after succeeding with the road signs, we went on to television and radio and education, of course, because since the early 60s, the growth in Welsh medium schools has been quite tremendous. It's not gone far enough, in my opinion, but the growth in Cardiff, for instance, when we started campaigning in the early 60s, there was one primary school teaching through the medium of Welsh in Cardiff, in the capital. Now there are about 20 large primary schools teaching through the medium of Welsh, and there are 3 secondary schools.
And I think it's fair to say Cardiff would not traditionally have been a Welsh-speaking area for many centuries.
Well, wasn't really. I mean, there was a Welsh tradition in Cardiff, but they were always a very, very small minority. But as Cardiff has grown as a capital, especially since devolution, of course, Cardiff has become the centre of Welsh television and Welsh radio and many other public bodies. So there has been a migration from the rest of Wales into Cardiff, and the Welsh-speaking population of Cardiff now is much greater and is very vigorous and is mostly middle class, and there is a very strong Welsh language community life in Cardiff now, and in fact the rest of Wales is now suffering from the loss of young people. Again, this is common to places like Ireland. The drift from rural areas to the urban areas has hit the Welsh language. But I mean, you can have 2 interpretations of the present situation of the language in Wales. One is a very positive one, in that we have a Welsh language television channel, we have a Welsh language radio channels, we have a vigorous recording industry in Welsh, a book publishing industry in Welsh, and of course the growth of the Welsh education. So that is a very positive picture. But the recent census figures have shown that there is still a small decline in the number of people or the percentage of people speaking Welsh. It's a mixed picture. But I am very positive myself. I am very optimistic, because there is a very strong groundswell of support, as we saw last year. I mean, I had the privilege of singing the Welsh national.
I should give the listeners some more information about you. You were a member of Plaid Cymru. You were a local councillor for Plaid Cymru, the party of Wales, the Welsh Nationalist Party. Your grandfather, Fred Jones, I think, was a founding member of that party, and you were at one stage the president of the party. But you might be much better known, and Irish people might not have heard your name, but I think they've certainly heard you if they are football fans, because you were singing the song, and forgive my pronunciation, Hood, which was the anthem of Wales at the World Cup. Tell me about that.
Not a very good
Oh,
pronunciation
I'm
of the
sorry.
song, but it's Ama Ohid, which
Ma'ahid.
means yes, good. We are still here. And the idea was of that song, I wrote it many years ago,
Mm-hmm.
when Wales was going through a tough time in the 80s under Margaret Thatcher. Um, and I wrote it as a song of defiance. Whatever you do, and despite everything happening, we are still here and we will survive. So it's a song to celebrate the survival of Wales, the Welsh language, and small nations everywhere. And it was adopted by the Welsh Football Association as their official World Cup song last year.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the privilege of singing it in Cardiff City Stadium a couple of times before the qualifying matches. And by then, it had been adopted by the Red Wall of Welsh supporters as their own campaign song. So I had a tremendous experience singing in front of 35,000 people, and all of them, or most of them, singing with me very energetically. And it was a great experience because it showed that there's a groundswell of support for
Mm-hmm.
Wales and the Welsh and the Welsh language amongst non-Welsh speakers as well.
Uh-huh.
So our fight now in Wales is not so much for official recognition, but to get the young people of Wales, especially, to adopt the Welsh language as something which is a part of their own lives in today's modern culture, and I think that is happening.
Uh,
Obviously, the schools have a lot to do with this, and since the football episode, I am constantly being invited to Welsh schools to talk about my World Cup experience, to talk about the song, and to talk about Welsh history. And that is the other thing which is developing rapidly in Wales, is teaching the people of Wales, especially the young people, our history, especially our recent history.
mm-hmm.
We feel very strongly about this, that Welsh history has been taught as the history of English kings and queens and the British Empire. Well, that is not the history of Wales. Wales has a tremendous history of radicalism, of campaigning and standing up for our rights. And so the video accompanying my song last year was a very radical video with the blessing of the Welsh Football Association, and that has had a tremendous effect. And people have said to me,
I saw one thing. I think in that video there was a young girl wearing a hat with a sticker, and the slogan on it was "Big enough, rich enough, smart enough, had enough." Tell me what that means.
Well, that is part of the growing campaign for independence, and that is one of the slogans of the Yes Cymru campaign. And again, this is growing very rapidly in support in all parts of Wales, partly because of the mess the Westminster government is doing of things these days. So people have become to think of, it's not true what they've been telling us, that we're too small or too weak or too poor. We have the ability and we have the resources to run our own ship, as it were. And the growth of support. Obviously, we have an elected Senedd or Parliament in Cardiff, which is not strong enough. It does not have full powers, but at least we're moving in the right direction. And the demand for more independence for Wales now is very real. And I think we'll see great developments.
Pause on that, David. You say the demand for more independence on Wales. You're obviously a past president of Plaid Cymru. What is and I should say that in 2020 you had a #1 hit with your song, which I won't mess up the pronunciation of. Again, a UK-wide #1 on the iTunes downloads chart, but I suspect Welsh nationalists were behind a lot of that. But what exactly is the position of Plaid Cymru in the sense of the constitutional status of Wales?
Well, Plaid Cymru is a part of the Welsh Government, and although it's still run by the Labour Party, there is now more official cooperation between Plaid Cymru as the Nationalist Party and the Labour Party. Now, some of us are a bit uncomfortable with any kind of partnership like this in politics. But on the other hand, I don't think we'll get anywhere without partnerships. And
Sure,
I
sure.
think
Put that aside. Put that aside for a minute. What's your end goal? What would you, regardless of whether Labour Party will cooperate with you or whatever, what would you like to see Wales as? A fully independent country like Ireland, or some sort of semi-detached, greater level of independence, maybe like the Isle of Man? Tell me, what's your goal?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no such thing as a bit of independence, really. My goal, and now Plaid Cymru's goal as well, is political independence, and that means that we have a parliament in Wales which can then decides how to interact and cooperate with other countries. So my end goal is a new Britain of independent nations: Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. And I believe England needs to get its act together and have more devolution within England. But then the four or five countries, the nations in Britain, can work together and create a new British partnership, which is nothing like the old partnership, which is not really a partnership at all. It's far too Anglo-centred and London-centred. It's happening.
Isn't that inevitable when England has like 20 or 30 times the population of Wales?
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing to do with size. I mean, there are so many countries smaller than Wales, full members of the European Union, full members of the United Nations. So it's nothing to do with size. I remember many years ago, we used to say, oh, isn't it bad in Estonia and Latvia, Lithuania, all these countries tied to the Soviet Union. Now they're independent nations. Many of them are smaller than Wales and with less natural resources, but they are doing well. They're full members of the United European Union, as Ireland is, and we want to join with Ireland, and we also believe in a united Ireland, and it makes more sense, that we are true to our roots, our history, and yes, of course, there is a different history in the northern part of Ireland, and that can be accommodated in a new arrangement in the British Isles. No, it's full independence, and then we can decide how we work with the rest of the world. And getting out of Brexit, the European Union was a calamity, and everybody now.
Although I should say, David, Wales voted in favour of Brexit, and voted in favour of Brexit, albeit by a narrow margin, but by a larger margin than the UK as a whole.
Oh no! I mean, the whole story of the Brexit campaign is such a story of lies, and it doesn't prove anything. If you had a referendum today on Europe, it would be totally different. Because we were told, for instance, that the National Health Service in Britain would be much better off after Brexit, which was a total lie, because we lost most of the staff for a start. It's been a sorry story, that, but I think it's been part of the shake-up, which has really led to a situation where the majority of people in Wales now know that there are great changes ahead. And although we have, since the early 60s, although we have seen great strides forward in the Welsh language situation and in the political situation, we have a long way to go to reach where Ireland is.
And just on that, and you see kind of Wales being independent in the way that many people in Scotland aspire to be. We had the Scottish Nationalist MP Alan Smith on a while back. He stuck very much to the party line, which is for the SNP, which is that after independence they will keep the British monarchy. But it's no secret that many people in the SNP aspire for Scotland to be an independent republic. And I asked Alan what his personal opinion was, and I think he's probably a bit of a Republican. Would you want to keep the Prince of Wales?
I mean, I campaigned against the investiture of Charles in 1969, and I had a lot of aggravation about that. But my opinion now is that it's not really a target worth campaigning for or against. Mm-hmm. The royal family is there, and it's, as far as I can see, it's dying the death. And we must concentrate on the important things: who governs Wales, who runs Wales, how we govern Wales, and then we can decide. In an independent
you don't sound like a committed monarchist, though.
I'm not. I'm a Republican. I
mean, that's a straight answer. That's even a straighter answer than I got from Alan Smith. But one thing I want to talk to you about, because you're obviously coming from the Welsh-speaking community, and that's about 20% of the people in Wales. And it is notable that even in Scotland now, perhaps a point or two up or a point or two down, but is close to 50-50 in terms of supporting independence. Nobody in Scotland, though, or only be a very, very small fringe opinion at most, would not support the idea of a Scottish Parliament with the local powers that they have currently. Is it the case maybe that Wales perhaps lacks self-confidence or lacks something? And I note that in 1999, when there was a referendum in Wales just to set up then the Welsh Assembly, as it was called, which has far less power than the Scottish Parliament, even at that, it barely passed. And as I say, you're a member of Plaid Cymru. Plaid Cymru has 12 of the 60 seats in the Welsh Senedd. Is it possible that the reason why the nationalist, the pro-independence movement in Wales is so much weaker is because it's perhaps not entirely, but largely confined to the Welsh-speaking community? How do you reach out to the English-speaking community?
Well, I mean, that's what I did last year, and I think we proved that there is a tremendous upsurge of support for the idea of Welshness, because you oversimplify the situation, the political situation, because there are many people in the Labour Party and in the Labour government who support, if not independence, a large measure of independence. So it's not a clear-cut Plaid Cymru versus the rest. I think Plaid Cymru is the catalyst for change, but the Labour Party is moving in that direction. And that's the important thing. You just keep talking about percentages. Well, if you came here to the Carnarvon area, a large part of Northwest Wales, I mean, it's not 20% at all. It's more like 80%.
But is that a weakness, that support is not evenly spread around the country, either geographically or in terms of community?
That's true of Ireland. That's true of all nations. I mean, things are not evenly spread. I mean, the whole process of assimilating Wales into England has been a long process over centuries. And, I mean, the Act of Union wanted to totally extirp the Welsh language. And they failed. I mean, but it's been a long process of assimilation and of pushing the Welsh language out of every aspect of Welsh life. But now the situation has been overturned to a great extent, and this is to the it shows the resilience of the Welsh people, and we're not going to give up now. And as again, if I may say so, Ireland has been a great inspiration for us, except in the one field of the language, because once you had political self-government, the language sort of fell down in your order of priorities in Ireland. But I think in Wales, in a way, the fight for the Welsh language is a part of our resilience and a part of our hope. I was in a rally last Saturday, and the fight goes on. The fight will never end. The fight for the Welsh language and for the Welsh nation is a fight which will never be completely over. But in that fight is our hope. In that fight is our future.
And tell me, when you see that vision of a independent, a series of independent countries in the British Isles, as you described it, is that tied up very much with a left-wing view of how society and the economy should be run? It's notable that it is only in, the second half of the 20th century or even later that nationalism, the Celtic nationalism in the various countries has been identified with the left politically.
Yeah, I mean, I don't talk in terms of left and right too often, but, Yes, of course I'm on the left of politics because that is the place to be. I believe in changing things. I believe in constantly improving the way we interact with each other and interact with other countries. And our vision is a very much an internationalist one. I mean, when we started campaigning for the Welsh language, we were also involved in the anti-apartheid campaigns. We were also involved in the anti-Vietnam War campaigns. It's always been a part of our internationalist approach. And it's not a confined thing. It's not one thing. But the idea of being on the right in politics now, I think we see signs of the real dangers of the extreme right in politics, and it frightens one. It frightens one in England and in America. I mean, what is happening from the right, extreme right. But on the other hand, I mean, I'm not talking of extreme left or anything else, but I believe in change. I believe in a society where people are equal and to give everybody equal a chance. And I believe that there are too many capitalists milking the situation here in Wales as in other countries, and we should give the workers much more part of the cake. And it's so, those are left-leaning socialist ideals. I'm also a Christian. I believe Christ was more of a socialist than he was of a capitalist. But it's I must stress this, that the situation in Wales, although it's bad in many terms, in economic terms and so on, the vigor and the vitality in Welsh life is still strong, and we are a nation of optimists. And whatever the figures were, you quoted the 79 referendum, but all other referendums since then have been very strongly in favour of increasing the powers of the Welsh government, and that is the sign of hope.
Okay, I want to just ask you two practical questions. One is it possible that any movement towards either Welsh independence, be that an absolute term, or greater Welsh independence, is sort of frozen until Scotland is resolved? And it may be the case that if Scotland voted for independence in the coming years, that would be a big boon to your cause. But until that happens, is the position sort of frozen?
Well, no, it's not frozen. No political situation is ever frozen. We've got work to do, and we're doing it. We are campaigning all the time.
But if Scotland voted for independence, that would be transformative.
What happens in Scotland obviously is relevant. And when Scotland votes for independence, and when Westminster finally succumb to the idea that the Scottish people want to be independent, then of course that'll be a real boost for Wales, but also it'll be a turning point with a warning sign. Do we want to remain as a part of this rump England state, or do you want to follow the paths of Scotland? And I emphasize again, this is not a question of breaking away or cutting off. It's a question of rearranging the politics of the countries of Britain in a fundamental way. And I welcome the day when Wales and Ireland will work together as two independent countries within the family of British nations, as well as a family of European nations.
And then just one other, very briefly, you're aware, and you've mentioned right-wing forces in the US, which have often been amplified by essentially Russian trolls whose mission is to, particularly online, is to sow division and weaken the United States. And there is evidence that was done with the Scottish independence movement as well. The people who are perhaps seeking to weaken Britain have no independence, no real interest in Scottish independence, but they just saw it as a lever to weaken an enemy. Are you careful about being used as a tool like that?
We have to be careful because, as you know very well, history teaches us that the one thing that can destroy any movement is to sow the seeds of inside fighting. That is the one thing that if you can destroy the unity of a movement, you destroy that movement. And it's so easy when you have movements like the nationalist movements in any country, with strong feelings on all sides. It's always easy to sow the seeds of internal quarrels, and we have to be alert to that. We have to be aware of that. And the modern technology and the World Wide Web makes all kinds of things possible. And we must be very, very aware of the fact that there are forces trying to split us apart and to create divisions wherever strong feelings arise.
And just finally then, David, thank you very much for talking about it. I have to ask, for the listeners who I think mostly will not be able to understand Welsh, can you give me just very briefly a lyric from that song and what it means and what it means to you?
Well, it's interesting because although it's been interpreted as a very political song, the content of it is not all that political. I've written many more political songs, but the essence of it is that we have survived. And I start with Magnus Maximus, the last Roman leader in Wales, who left us in 383. And I wrote the song in 1983, so it was a useful hook, The Romans left us 1600 years ago. And they've gone, and we're still here. And we're still speaking the language we spoke when Magnus Maximus left us. So that was the beginning of it. But of course, then we were under the yoke of Margaret Thatcher. And so I've linked it to Thatcher and everything which has happened since. So despite everyone and everything, gweitha pawb a phopeth. Despite everything and everyone, we are still here. We survive, and we will survive.
David Owen, former president of Plaid Cymru, also singer-songwriter and Welsh language rights activist for the past 60 or so years. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you. Pleasure speaking to you.
Go to the website for sources and references from the show. And while you're there, you can like the show on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter @Here's How Podcast, and follow David Owen @David Owen, although your Welsh would need to be better than mine. And get in touch if you want to suggest a guest or a topic that we could feature in an upcoming show. Thanks again to all of the patrons on Patreon. As I said, those donations cover the cost of keeping the podcast going and hosting and so forth. Kevin and myself basically do the podcast for free, but if you could throw in the price of a pint once or twice a month in order to support us, that'd be great. The details are on the website, or you can sign up at patreon.com/here'show. Also on the website, you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, or by email. All of that information is at www.here'show.ie. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. The co-producer is Kevin Wolf. Thank you for listening.